So I'm on a mission this morning. I'm actually trying to surprise my wife. We're in the middle of kind of, I guess, quasi redecorating our living room. Got new couches and stuff like that. And my wife wanted to redo some of the artwork that was on the wall. And it's kind of a larger wall. And she was asking me, what kind of a photo would look good on this size wall. And I was like, a nice panoramic photo would look good. And of course, being the supporting wife that she was, she immediately asked me, do you have any of your photos that would work well? And I started to think about it. I was like, I don't have a lot of pano images. It's something that I've wanted to do more of over the last couple of years, but I just haven't. So I'm out here this morning trying to surprise her and create something that's kind of ties into the local area that we live in, and our local area is synonymous for pine trees. So good thing my wife doesn't watch any of my videos, otherwise it would ruin the surprise. But I had this kind of idea in my mind to create this kind of telephoto, kind of swath of these pine trees with the sun kind of rising in the background. The sun rose about, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 minutes ago. It's going to take a little bit to get above the tree line before the light starts coming through. So I'm just kind of looking around, just trying to find just a little vignette amongst all these trees with the tree trunks and the leaves, but just trying to find the perfect kind of a balance for that. And zoom all the way in, maybe a shallow depth of field, just kind of throw out the background. That's kind of what I'm having in mind right now. Not sure if it's going to work, not sure if this is the location or if these are the weather conditions for it, but nevertheless, that is the goal for this morning. So I did find this area kind of right through here. Hard part is trying to get it to where the trees are kind of the same distance apart, because if I want to use a shallow depth of field, the only way that's really going to work out is if all the trees, I should say the main trees that are part of the composition, are pretty much the same equal distance from the camera. So trying to figure out exactly where those trees reside within this forest and where the light is rising, or the sun is rising behind it, because I want there to be a little bit of light on the actual leaves. That's been kind of the challenge right here. But I think I found at least the best grouping. If I wait too much longer, the sun's going to get up too high in the sky. And like I mentioned a minute ago, I don't know if these are the best weather conditions. There's not a lot of clouds in the sky, so the light is going to come very, very quickly, and it'll eventually become harsh very rapidly, very quickly. But nevertheless, I'm kind of rushing around a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this set up. I wanna do a vertical pano, nothing crazy, maybe 3 shots, but I wanna kind of really zoom in and kind of tighten it up to where it's just a strip of these trees. I think that will be something interesting, to something a little bit different. Like I said, this is in my mind. I'm not 100% certain if it's really gonna work, but I'm gonna give it the old, what do they say? The old college try. This probably would have been a little bit easier to balance, or I should say level up my tripod before I put my camera on it. But it is what it is. We're at where we're at. That is just about perfect. Just want to make sure my camera is perfectly level now. Close. How's that look? Perfect. Next I want to check this histogram here and just kind of sweep the camera from left to right just to see if there's any areas that start to blow out, like right there. Over here, it's good. Over here, it's not. And make a couple changes. It's something you always want to do when you're shooting panos, because one portion of your scene might be properly exposed, and then when you start to rotate it in another direction, you could be entering into some territory that is not as well exposed. So make some couple changes here. The sky's okay, because I'm not really looking for the sky. I just want to kind of get this middle portion right through here. That'll be the actual pano. Oh shoot, and I just remembered, or I just realized that I have my IBIS on still with this. Whenever you're shooting on a tripod, you really don't want to have your in-body image stabilization on, because, I mean, every camera works a little bit different. I should say its mechanism and how it stabilizes the sensor. But whenever it's on the actual tripod, you want to have that turned off, because it'll be looking for any kind of micro kind of shudders or shaking, and it can soften your image just a little bit. So I always try and turn that off whenever I'm on a tripod. But when I first got here, I was kind of hand holding my shots, just trying to look for that little vignette in these woods, and I cobwebs. Forgot that I still had it on, so I'm gonna have to start this over now. I'm kind of sticking with the theme of making mistakes here. I was doing a one-on-one session with someone the other day, and we were talking about, or I was talking about kind of mistakes that I used to make when I first got started, and one of those was using auto ISO. And I just felt that that would be, easier for me to get started if I just let the camera decide what ISO level to use. And from my experience, and once again, I think every camera probably handles this a little bit differently, but from my experience, a camera will almost always pick an ISO that is higher than it's actually needed. So I can tell you how many of my photos when I was using auto ISO was using ISO of like 1600 when it could have easily gotten away with maybe 400 or maybe 200. So from my experience, the camera will almost always pick an ISO level far higher than it is really required to properly expose an image. So I would definitely recommend keeping that off and just picking the ISO level yourself. I'm starting to realize that this little plan of mine is a little more difficult than I had originally anticipated. Woodland scenes are already hard enough to photograph, but you're looking for just a little snippet of order is becoming a little bit of a challenge. And as you can see, the light is already starting to come through. The light's starting to get very contrasty, which is okay right now because the light's not too harsh, but I'm quickly running out of time here, trying to figure this out. Oh, here goes a ton of deer. 1, 2, 3, and a baby. Always cool. Something else that I think is a very common issue for people getting into photography is, I think the majority of your shots when you're starting out is usually handheld. It's usually not on a tripod, and I always used to struggle with getting photos that were sharp and in focus. At least I thought they weren't sharp or in focus, but in actuality they were in focus. I was just always using too slow of a shutter speed to hand hold the shot. And that was something that took me quite a while to really figure out until I, discovered I think it's called the 1/over rule. So for instance, if you're shooting at, this is a 100 to 200 lens, and if I'm shooting at 100 millimeters, my shutter speed should be 1/100. Or if I'm shooting at, let's say, the maximum end of this focal range, 200 millimeters, I should be shooting at 1/200 of a second. That's a good place to start. It depends on your sensor size too. This is a medium format. If you're using a full frame, that could be slightly different, or a crop sensor, but that is a good rule of thumb. as far as a starting off point, and then you can kind of make those adjustments from there. Take a couple images, zoom in on the back of your camera, and make sure that those images are pin sharp. And of course, if you have in-body image stabilization, turn that on if you're hand holding the shot. That will certainly help you out as well. I'm not sure I'm going to get any more opportunities today to try and create this, but nevertheless, I did want to kind of carry on with the theme here of beginner camera setting mistakes, or at least the mistakes that I always used to make. And a couple of them is, always using automatic modes. I think that's one of the more widely talked about mistakes is, I think when you're first starting out, using automatic modes is fantastic just to kind of get your feet wet, get you going a little bit. But I think you want to quickly get out of those automatic modes just because it's really going to help you, I guess, what do you say, unleash the true potential of your camera when you can get out of those automatic modes as quickly as possible. And it's kind of like the other one of, shooting in JPEG all the time. There's nothing wrong with JPEG. I love JPEG images, but I think that shooting RAW is going to help you overall in photography just from an editing perspective, because if you're shooting in JPEG, you're not going to be editing those photos nearly as much as you are if you are shooting in RAW. So I think you should try and shoot in RAW as quickly as you can when you're first getting started, because it's going to just help you along just the overall post-processing and editing your photos, help you to understand that aspect of it all. Because if you saw my video a couple of weeks ago about editing mistakes, you'll know, at least my thought on it all, that two of the more difficult aspects of getting into outdoor photography is one, post-processing and editing your photos, and two is the topic of this week's video, which is camera settings. So shooting in JPEG has its place, but I think you want to start shooting in RAW as quickly as you can just to get more proficient from an editing perspective. I'll tell you what, this has been one of the most pleasant mornings. I live in North Carolina, in the southeast portion of the US, and it's now July and it gets hot, and not so much hot, just humid. And in the mornings lately, it's just been so just sticky and thick outside, but it's pretty nice this morning. There's more deer right there. Now that the light is pretty much unusable, I've actually shifted my focus to try and capture a photograph of a deer because they are everywhere here this morning. It's like they're enjoying the weather just as much as I am. But what was I just about to say? Oh, another one, as far as camera setting mistakes, is always using the same exact white balance. I usually shoot on auto white balance, mainly because I'm always shooting in RAW and I can pretty much change my white balance to whatever I want during post-processing, and that's fine. But I think just getting familiar with the different white balances, so maybe use a cloudy white balance or a sunny white balance, and just kind of play around with those and just getting more familiar with what each type of white balance will do to your photograph, which white balances will warm up your images, which white balances will cool down your images. And once again, that just helps you to better understand the kind of the Kelvin scale, the difference between a warmer white balance versus a cooler white balance, versus just always leaving it on auto. This kind of goes back to the other mistake of always using automatic modes. Well, auto white balance is another automatic mode. So just playing around with different white balance settings, I think, is definitely important. But also, ensuring that you're using there's another deer, the correct focus points. Now, I always use on a single autofocus point, so whenever I focus in, it'll lock into that area, and then the focus won't drift, the focus won't shift, and then I can take my shot. But if you're using a continuous autofocus mode, you can focus in on your subject, and then before you actually take your exposure, your camera has focused on something else, because in continuous autofocus mode, it's constantly hunting and constantly focusing. So I think that ensuring that you're always using a single point of focus or a single point focus mode is a good best practice to get into. But that was something that always used to trip me up, because I used to shoot my kids' sports a lot, and I was always shooting an autofocus continuous. So I just kind of always left it on that. And I found that when I was shooting landscapes, a lot of times my focus would shift. It would be what I wanted in focus, wouldn't be in focus, because my camera is hunting the entire time. So that was something that plagued me for a little while as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and pack things up, head back to my car and get home. The conditions didn't quite pan out. Actually, it panned out pretty much exactly what I anticipated it would. I knew there wouldn't be a whole lot of cloud cover this morning, and I knew the light was going to get harsh really quickly. It was the likelihood that there'd be any kind of fog was very, very low this morning. But nevertheless, I think I've got a better idea of what I'm looking for, and kind of good starting off point. So I'm going to kind of keep up with my little my surprise project for my wife and see if I can come up with something here. And hopefully she continues with her trend and does not watch my videos. Otherwise, this completely ruined the surprise for her. But I do hope that you enjoyed this week's video. You're able to get some helpful information from the mistakes that I used to make, that that will hopefully help you out in your photographic journey as well. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. Definitely get back in touch with you. And if you enjoyed this week's video, if you could, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I really do appreciate you watching this week's video, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.